I should have known better. 20 years on the road and I broke my own golden rule. Never pick up hitchhikers. But there was something about this guy that made me stop. Maybe it was the defeated slump of his shoulders or the way he stumbled along the shoulder, barely lifting his thumb. Whatever it was, I felt a tug of pity as I downshifted and guided my rig onto the gravel. The cab door creaked open and a gust of hot, dusty air rushed in. The man climbed up, his movements slow and deliberate. He settled into the passenger seat with a grunt, a duffel bag clutched to his chest. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "Thought I was going to die out there." I nodded, easing the truck back onto the empty highway. "Where are you headed?" "Wherever you're going is fine," he replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I snuck a glance at my new passenger. He was younger than I'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and hair that looked like it hadn't seen shampoo in weeks. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, hanging loosely on his thin frame. "Name's Mike," I offered, trying to break the awkward silence. He hesitated before responding. "John." The miles rolled by, nothing but endless desert and scrubland on either side of the highway. The sun was sinking towards the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. In any other circumstance, it would have been beautiful. John shifted in his seat, and I noticed his fingers drumming nervously on his duffel bag. His eyes darted to the side mirror, then back to the road. "You all right there, John?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. He jerked his head towards me as if he'd forgotten I was there. Yeah, just tired, I guess." I nodded, not buying it for a second. The cab fell silent again, save for the rumble of the engine and the hum of the tires on asphalt. As darkness fell, John's agitation seemed to grow. He kept glancing at the side mirror, his body tense. I found myself checking the mirror more often too, half expecting to see something trailing us in the gathering gloom. "Mind if I turn on the radio?" I asked, reaching for the dial. John's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "No!" he blurted, then seemed to catch himself. I've got a headache. Mind if we keep it quiet?" I pulled my hand back slowly, unease crawling up my spine. "Sure, no problem." The next hour passed in tense silence. John's eyes were now glued to the side mirror, his breathing quick and shallow. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white in the glow of the dashboard lights. A green sign appeared in my headlights. "Rest area, 2 miles." I cleared my throat. "Think I'm going to pull in up ahead, stretch my legs a bit." John's head snapped towards me, his eyes wide with panic. "No, we can't stop. We have to keep moving." I frowned, any lingering sympathy evaporating. "Look, buddy, I don't know what your deal is, but I've been driving for 10 hours straight. I need a break." He leaned towards me, his voice urgent. "Please, just a little further. They might be following us." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's following us?" John shook his head frantically. "I can't. I shouldn't have. Just keep driving, okay?" My heart was pounding now, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I eased off the accelerator, the truck slowing as we approached the rest area. "I think this is where you get off, John." His hand dove into his duffel bag, and for one terrifying moment, I thought he was going for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled wad of bills. "I'll pay you. Whatever you want, just don't stop." I ignored him, guiding the truck onto the exit ramp. The rest area was deserted. A single streetlight illuminating an empty parking lot and a squat cinder-block building housing restrooms and vending machines. As I brought the rig to a stop, John's panic reached a fever pitch. He was muttering under his breath, his eyes darting between the mirrors and the shadows beyond the reach of my headlights. "Out," I said firmly, reaching across to open his door. "Now—" He turned to me, his face a mask of desperation. "You don't understand. They'll find me. They'll—" A pair of headlights suddenly swept across the parking lot, cutting him off mid-sentence. A dark sedan pulled in behind us, its engine purring quietly. John let out a strangled whimper. "Oh, God, they're here." I watched in the mirror as 2 men got out of the car. They were dressed in plain clothes, but something about their posture and the way they moved screamed law enforcement to me. "John," I said quietly, "what did you do?" He was trembling now, clutching his duffel bag like a lifeline. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I panicked." The men were approaching the truck now, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. One of them called out, "FBI! John Mercer, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." I turned to John, anger and fear warring inside me. FBI? Jesus Christ, man, what the hell did you get me mixed up in? He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw the full weight of his despair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then in one fluid motion he flung open the door and bolted into the darkness. The FBI agents shouted and gave chase, their flashlights bobbing as they pursued John into the scrubland beyond the rest area. I sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, my mind reeling. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I heard shouting in the distance. The agents returned, a handcuffed and defeated-looking John between them. One of the agents approached my door. I rolled down the window, my mouth dry. "Sir," he said, his tone professional but not unkind. "I'm Agent Ramirez with the FBI. We're going to need you to come with us to answer some questions." I nodded numbly, climbing down from the cab on shaky legs. As the agent led me towards their car, I caught a glimpse of John in the back seat. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a mixture of shame and resignation in his gaze before he looked away. The next few hours passed in a blur. I sat in a small room at the local police station recounting my story over and over to Agent Ramirez and his partner. They were particularly interested in anything John might have said or done during our drive. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Ramirez said, leaning forward in his chair, "I want you to understand that you're not in any trouble. You had no way of knowing who John Mercer was or what he'd done." I rubbed my eyes, exhaustion settling over me like a heavy blanket. "What did he do?" The agents exchanged a look before Ramirez continued. 3 days ago, Mercer was involved in a hit-and-run accident that left a young woman in critical condition. Instead of staying at the scene, he panicked and fled. We've been tracking him ever since. I shook my head, trying to reconcile the frightened man in my truck with someone capable of such a thing. Will she be okay?" "She's still in the ICU, but doctors are hopeful," Ramirez replied. "Thanks to you, Mercer will face justice for his actions." As I walked out of the police station into the pre-dawn light, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that I was free to go, anger at John for putting me in that situation, and a lingering sadness for the mess he'd made of his life with one terrible decision. I climbed back into my truck, the familiar surroundings both comforting and somehow alien after the night's events. As I pulled out onto the highway, the rising sun painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I couldn't shake the image of John's desperate face from my mind. 20 years on the road, and I'd seen my fair share of strange things. But I knew that this night, this hitchhiker would stay with me for a long time to come. And as I settled in for another long day of driving, I made a silent promise to myself: no more hitchhikers, no matter how harmless they might seem. Because you never really know what someone's running from or who might be chasing them. Story 2. The neon sign of Joey's Pizza flickered weakly in the misty rain, casting an eerie glow on the empty street. I pulled my jacket tighter, shivering as I wheeled my beat-up bicycle out of the alley. It was 11:55 p.m., my last delivery of the night. Just one more run, then I could call it quits on this godforsaken shift. 815 Maple Street, I muttered, squinting at the address scrawled on the greasy paper bag. The pizza inside was still hot, steam escaping through a small tear in the cardboard box. I sighed, mapping the route in my head. Maple Street was on the other side of town, in one of those fancy gated communities where the houses looked more like small castles. As I pedaled through the deserted streets, the steady rhythm of my breathing and the soft whir of bicycle tires filled the night air. Streetlights cast long shadows that seemed to reach for me as I passed. A dog barked in the distance, the sound echoing off silent buildings. I'd been working this job for 6 months now, ever since I dropped out of college. Mom wasn't thrilled, but bills needed paying, and delivering pizzas beat flipping burgers. Most nights were uneventful. Drunk college kids, harried parents, the occasional creep who forgot to put on pants. But something about tonight felt off. Maybe it was the full moon peeking through the clouds, or the unusual silence that blanketed the city. Whatever it was, it had my nerves on edge. I turned onto Maple Street, the manicured lawns and towering oak trees a stark contrast to the cramped apartment buildings I'd left behind. House numbers ticked by: 801, 803, 805. As I approached 815, I felt my unease grow. The house loomed before me, a sprawling Victorian with peeling paint and overgrown bushes. Unlike its well-maintained neighbors, 815 Maple looked like it hadn't seen a lick of care in years. Weeds choked the front yard and a crooked "for sale" sign swayed gently in the breeze. I frowned, double-checking the address on the pizza box. This couldn't be right. The house looked abandoned. Swallowing my apprehension, I leaned my bike against a gnarled oak tree and made my way up the cracked walkway. The porch steps creaked ominously under my weight. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated as I noticed the door was slightly ajar. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to pedal away as fast as I could. But I needed this job. One complaint about an undelivered pizza could get me fired. I cleared my throat. "Hello? Joey's Pizza Delivery." No response. I pushed the door open a few inches wider, peering into the darkened interior. "Anyone home? I've got your large pepperoni and mushroom." A muffled thud from deeper in the house made me jump. It was followed by what sounded like a choked sob. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaking slightly. "Is everything okay in there?" Another thud, louder this time. Then a woman's voice, strained and desperate. "Help! Please help me!" My heart raced. I stood frozen on the porch, pizza forgotten in my hands as my mind whirled through possibilities. Was this a genuine cry for help or some kind of sick prank? The woman's voice came again, closer this time. "Please, he's going to kill me." That snapped me out of my paralysis. I fumbled for my phone with trembling fingers, nearly dropping it as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" I spoke in a rushed whisper, explaining the situation as best I could. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, but advised me not to enter the house. I ended the call, my palms slick with sweat. The smart thing would be to wait for the police. But what if they didn't get here in time? What if that woman really was in danger? Taking a deep breath, I eased the door open wider and stepped inside. The interior of the house was pitch black. The beam of my phone's flashlight seemed feeble against the oppressive darkness. Dust motes danced in the air, and the musty smell of neglect filled my nostrils. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid. "I'm here to help. Where are you?" A floorboard creaked somewhere to my left. I swung my light in that direction, illuminating a hallway lined with peeling wallpaper. At the far end, a door stood slightly open. I inched forward, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. As I neared the door, I heard muffled sounds coming from within, shuffling movements, ragged breathing. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. The beam of my flashlight swept across the room, revealing overturned furniture and shattered glass. And there, huddled in the corner, was a woman. Her wrists were bound behind her back, and a gag covered her mouth. Her wide, terrified eyes met mine. I rushed towards her, my mind racing. "It's okay," I whispered, reaching to remove her gag. "I'm here to help. The police are on their way." As my fingers touched the cloth, the woman's expression changed. The fear in her eyes was replaced by something else. Triumph? Too late, I realized my mistake. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, but not fast enough. Something heavy struck the side of my head, sending me sprawling. My phone clattered to the floor, the beam of light spinning crazily across the room. Dazed, I looked up to see a man looming over me. He was tall and lean, with a face like carved stone. In his hand, he clutched a wicked-looking knife. "Well, well," he said, his voice cold and amused. "Looks like dinner came to us tonight, darling." The woman stood up, shrugging off her bonds with ease. She moved to stand beside the man, a predatory smile playing on her lips. And here I was worried we'd have to go hunting again. My head swam, partly from the blow and partly from the surreal horror of the situation. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, only in movies or twisted urban legends. I scrambled backwards, my hand closing around something solid, the leg of an overturned chair. Without thinking, I swung it with all my might. The makeshift weapon caught the man by surprise, striking him in the knee. He howled in pain, stumbling backwards. I seized the moment, lurching to my feet and making a mad dash for the door. Behind me, I heard the woman snarl, "Don't let him get away." I tore through the house, my vision blurry, my lungs burning. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps thundering on the old wooden floors. The front door loomed ahead, my gateway to safety. I burst out onto the porch, nearly tumbling down the steps in my haste. My bicycle was just a few yards away. If I could reach it... A hand grabbed the back of my jacket, yanking me backwards. I spun, lashing out blindly. My fist connected with something solid, and I heard a grunt of pain. Suddenly, the night was filled with flashing lights and the wail of sirens. Police cars screeched to a halt in front of the house, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. "Police! Freeze!" The man and woman hesitated for a split second, caught off guard by the sudden arrival of law enforcement. It was all the opening I needed. I wrenched myself free and sprinted towards the nearest officer, gasping out my story between ragged breaths. What followed was a blur of activity. The couple was arrested, spitting curses and threats as they were led away in handcuffs. I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders as a paramedic tended to the lump on my head. Detective Rodriguez, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, took my statement. "You're lucky to be alive, kid," she said, shaking her head. "We've been after these two for months. Serial killers preying on delivery drivers and other service workers. Always one step ahead of us until tonight." I nodded numbly, still struggling to process everything that had happened. "The pizza," I mumbled. I dropped the pizza. Rodriguez chuckled, patting my shoulder. "I think your boss will understand, given the circumstances. You did good tonight. You saved lives, including your own." As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion hit me like a truck. I watched as crime scene techs swarmed the old house, documenting evidence of horrors I could only imagine. In the distance, I could see my bicycle still leaning against the oak tree, a reminder of how close I'd come to becoming just another statistic. The sun was peeking over the horizon by the time I was cleared to go home. As I pedaled through the awakening city, everything looked different. The world felt sharper, more vivid, as if I was seeing it for the first time. I knew that night would stay with me forever, haunting my dreams and coloring every interaction with strangers. But I also knew I was one of the lucky ones. I had survived, and in doing so, had helped bring two monsters to justice. As I locked up my bike outside my apartment building, I made a silent vow. Tomorrow, I'd start looking for a new job. Maybe it was time to give burger flipping a chance after all. Story 3. The neon sign of Chin's garden flickered weakly, casting an eerie green glow across the rain-slicked pavement. I squinted at the delivery address on my phone, cursing under my breath. 1847 Sycamore Street, clear on the other side of town. On a good night, it'd be a 20-minute ride. Tonight, with the rain coming down in sheets, who knew? I zipped up my waterproof jacket and adjusted the insulated bag on my back. The smell of General Tso's chicken and fried rice wafted up, making my stomach growl. 6 hours into my shift, and I hadn't had time for more than a granola bar. "You sure about this, Zoe?" Marco called from the kitchen. "That's a rough neighborhood, especially this late." I waved off his concern. "I'll be fine. Besides, rent's due next week." With a resigned shrug, Marco disappeared back into the steamy kitchen. I wheeled my bicycle out the back door, wincing as the cold rain hit my face. One more delivery, I told myself. One more, then I could call it a night. The streets were nearly deserted as I pedaled through downtown. Raindrops pelted my face, and my shoes were already soaked through. A few taxis splashed by, their yellow paint garish under the streetlights. In store windows, mannequins stood silent sentinel, watching my progress with blank eyes. As I neared Sycamore Street, the well-lit shops and restaurants gave way to boarded-up buildings and weed-choked lots. My fingers tightened on the handlebars. Marco was right. This wasn't a great area, especially for a woman alone at night. I turned onto Sycamore, scanning house numbers. 1821, 1835. There. 1847 was a dilapidated Victorian, its paint peeling and porch sagging. No lights were on, but I could see the glow of a TV through a gap in the curtains. I leaned my bike against a rusted chain-link fence and made my way up the creaky steps. The doorbell, unsurprisingly, didn't work. I knocked, the sound oddly muffled in the rainy night. Long seconds ticked by. I was about to knock again when I heard shuffling footsteps from inside. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a wrinkled face. "Who's there?" a quavery voice demanded. "Delivery from Chen's garden," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "I've got an order for Mr. Chen." The door opened wider. The old man peered at me suspiciously, then at the insulated bag on my back. Finally, he nodded and fumbled in his pocket for his wallet. As I handed over the food and waited for payment, my eyes darted around the cluttered interior. Stacks of newspapers, unwashed dishes, an ancient TV blaring a late-night infomercial. The smell of cats and something else, something sour and unpleasant, wafted out. "Here," the old man grunted, pressing a wad of crumpled bills into my hand. Before I could count it or even thank him, the door slammed shut. I sighed, shoving the money into my pocket. Probably no tip, but at least the delivery was done. I turned to leave, already dreaming of a hot shower and my warm bed. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows across the street. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. It could have been nothing, a cat maybe, or just rain-swept leaves. But some instinct, honed by months of late-night deliveries in sketchy neighborhoods, told me otherwise. I squinted into the darkness. For a moment all was still. Then I saw it again, a human shape moving with deliberate slowness behind a parked car. My mouth went dry. I casually glanced up and down the street, pretending to check for traffic. Empty in both directions. The nearest open business, a 24-hour laundromat, was at least 5 blocks away. I forced myself to move naturally as I went back to my bicycle, every nerve on high alert. As I unchained it, I stole another glance across the street. The figure had moved closer, lurking in the shadow of a gnarled oak tree. Panic clawed at my throat. I swung my leg over the bike, ready to pedal for my life, but which way? Going back the way I came would take me deeper into this run-down neighborhood. Going forward might lead me into a trap. Who knew if the person had friends waiting up ahead? A quiet scuff of shoes on wet pavement made the decision for me. I pushed off hard, my bicycle wobbling for a moment before I found my balance. I chanced to look over my shoulder and my blood ran cold. The figure had emerged from the shadows and was now jogging across the street towards me. I poured every ounce of strength into my legs, willing the bicycle to go faster. Rain lashed at my face, blurring my vision. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. Up ahead, I saw an alley between 2 abandoned storefronts. Without thinking, I swerved into it. Maybe I could lose them in the maze of back streets. The alley was narrow and dark, littered with soggy cardboard boxes and overflowing trash cans. I weaved around the obstacles, my tires skidding on the slick pavement. The footsteps behind me echoed off the brick walls, impossibly loud in the confined space. I emerged from the alley onto another street, this one even more deserted than Sycamore. Boarded-up houses loomed on either side, their empty windows like dead eyes. I turned left, then right, then left again, taking random turns in an effort to shake my pursuer. But the footsteps kept coming. Sometimes they'd fade slightly, only to grow louder again. Whoever was chasing me knew these streets, maybe even better than I did. My legs were burning now, my lungs on fire. I couldn't keep this pace up much longer. I needed to find help or a safe place to hide. Ahead, I spotted a flickering streetlight illuminating a bus stop. An idea struck me. I put on a final burst of speed, reaching the bus stop just as the light went out completely. In the sudden darkness, I leapt off my bike, letting it clatter to the ground. Then I crouched behind the bus stop's bench, making myself as small as possible. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold metal of the bench. Please, I thought desperately, please just keep going. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the rain and my own thundering heartbeat. Then a voice spoke from just a few feet away. "I know you're there." It was a man's voice, low and oddly calm. I squeezed my eyes shut as if that could somehow make me invisible. "I'm not going to hurt you," the voice continued. "I just want to talk." Yeah, right, like I was going to fall for that. I remained silent, my mind racing. Maybe if I sprinted now, I could make it to the laundromat. Surely someone there would help me. A sigh. "Look, I'm a police officer, Detective John Reeves, 7th Precinct. I can show you my badge if you come out." That got my attention. Cautiously, I peered around the edge of the bench. In the dim light from a distant street lamp, I could make out a tall figure standing a few yards away. He was holding something out. A wallet, maybe? "Why were you chasing me?" I demanded, my voice shaky but defiant. "I wasn't chasing you exactly," he replied. "I was tailing you." We've had reports of a drug ring using delivery drivers as unwitting mules. When I saw you making a late-night delivery to a known drug house, I got suspicious. My mind reeled. The old man, the strange smell in his house. Had I unknowingly been delivering more than just Chinese food? Slowly, I stood up, my legs wobbling. So, I'm not in trouble. The detective shook his head. No, you're not. But I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. Maybe over a cup of coffee? You look like you could use something warm. I hesitated, still wary. But as the adrenaline faded, I realized how cold and tired I was. And if he really was a cop, well, that would be a whole lot better than the alternatives my imagination had conjured up. Okay, I said finally. But I choose the place, and you walk in front of me. Detective Reeves chuckled. Smart girl. Lead the way. As we walked towards the all-night diner a few blocks over, my bike squeaking between us, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. What had started as a simple late-night delivery had turned into something straight out of a crime novel. One thing was for sure, I was definitely asking for a raise when I got back to Chin's garden. Danger pay seemed only fair when your job description suddenly included unwitting drug mule and amateur detective. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start looking for a new line of work, one that didn't involve dark alleys, mysterious pursuers, or the constant smell of General Tso's chicken. But first, coffee, and maybe some answers about what exactly I'd gotten myself mixed up in. Something told me this was going to be a long night, and an even longer statement to the police. As we pushed open the diner door, a bell jingling cheerfully above us, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a very unexpected turn. For better or worse remained to be seen. Story 4. The engine of my Kawasaki Ninja purred beneath me as I weaved through the congested streets of downtown. My phone buzzed against my thigh, the GPS recalculating for the third time in as many minutes. I was lost, and the clock was ticking. Urgent delivery to 1313 Raven Street, the dispatcher had said. VIP client. Don't screw this up, Alex. Problem was, 1313 Raven Street didn't seem to exist. I'd been riding for Swift Courier Services for 6 months now, and I prided myself on never missing a delivery. But this one had me stumped. I'd circled the block half a dozen times, each pass ratcheting up my frustration and unease. Raven Street itself was real enough, a narrow, poorly lit alley squeezed between two towering office buildings. But the numbers jumped from 1311 to 1315 with no 1313 in sight. It was as if the address had been erased from existence. I pulled over, killing the engine and planting my feet on the cracked pavement. The weight of the package in my backpack seemed to increase with each passing second. Whatever was inside, it was heavy and valuable, judging by the way my boss had stressed its importance. A gust of wind sent discarded newspapers skittering down the alley. I shivered, zipping my leather jacket up to my chin. The sodium streetlights cast everything in a sickly orange glow, deepening the shadows between buildings. I was about to call it quits and head back to headquarters when I noticed something odd. A sleek black sedan was crawling down the street, moving at a snail's pace. As it passed me, the driver, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses, turned to stare. Who wears sunglasses at night? The car continued on, turned the corner, and disappeared from view. I shook my head, chalking it up to late-night weirdness in the big city. But as I kick-started my bike, preparing to admit defeat, the sedan reappeared at the other end of the block. This time it slowed to a stop directly across from me. The engine idled, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in my chest. The driver was still staring, his face impassive behind those ridiculous shades. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran down my spine. I gunned the engine and took off, tires squealing on the damp asphalt. In my side mirror, I saw the sedan pull away from the curb, following at a discreet distance. My heart raced as I wove through traffic, taking random turns in an attempt to lose my tail. But every time I thought I'd shaken them, the black car would reappear, always keeping the same maddeningly consistent gap between us. After 15 minutes of this cat-and-mouse game, I made a snap decision. I cut down a narrow side street, then quickly pulled into the shadows of a recessed doorway. Killing the engine, I held my breath as the sedan cruised past my hiding spot. Once it was out of sight, I let out a shaky exhale. What the hell was going on? Was this connected to the mystery package? Or had I somehow wandered into the middle of something much bigger and potentially dangerous? I fished my phone out of my pocket, fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the office. "Swift Courier Dispatch," a bored voice answered. "Hey, it's Alex. I'm having trouble with this delivery to 1313 Raven Street. The address doesn't seem to exist." There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. "That's weird," the dispatcher said. "It's in our system, but I can't find it on any maps. Hold on, let me check something." More typing, then a sharp intake of breath. "Oh shit, what?" I demanded, a knot forming in my stomach. "Alex, listen to me carefully," the dispatcher said, all traces of boredom gone from his voice. "Abandon the delivery. Get back to HQ immediately. Do not stop for anyone or anything, understand? But now, Alex," he barked, then hung up. I stared at my phone, mind reeling. In 6 months, I'd never heard anyone at Swift sound so alarmed. Whatever was in my backpack, it was clearly more than just another rush delivery. I was about to start my bike when a flicker of movement caught my eye. Across the street, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Even in the dim light, I recognized the suit and sunglasses. How had he found me? The man started walking towards me, his pace unhurried but purposeful. I fumbled with my keys, adrenaline making my movements clumsy. "Mr. Reeves," the man called out, his voice calm and oddly familiar. "I believe you have something that belongs to us." I froze. How did he know my name? The man was halfway across the street now. In the glow of a nearby streetlight, I caught a glimpse of something metallic in his hand. A gun. Panic surged through me. I finally got the key in the ignition and twisted hard. The engine roared to life just as the man broke into a run. I peeled out of the doorway, the bike's rear tire fishtailing on the slick pavement. A sharp crack split the air, and my side mirror exploded in a shower of glass and plastic. He was shooting at me. I hunched low over the handlebars, weaving erratically as I raced down the empty street. More shots rang out, but none found their mark. I turned a corner hard, nearly laying the bike down in my desperation to put distance between myself and my pursuer. For the next 10 minutes, I rode like I'd never ridden before. I ran red lights, jumped curbs, and squeezed through gaps in traffic that I wouldn't have attempted in my wildest dreams under normal circumstances. All the while, my mind raced faster than my bike. Who were these people? What was in the package, and how had a simple delivery job turned into a life-or-death chase through the city? Eventually, I found myself in a quiet residential neighborhood, the streets lined with identical row houses. I'd lost my pursuers for now, but I was hopelessly lost myself. My phone had died at some point during the chase, leaving me without GPS or any way to call for help. I pulled over, gasping for breath. My hands shook as I unzipped my jacket, checking myself for injuries. Miraculously, I seemed to be unharmed. The weight of the backpack suddenly felt like a ticking bomb. Whatever was inside had nearly gotten me killed. Part of me wanted to dump it in the nearest trash can and wash my hands of the whole affair, but curiosity and a stubborn sense of pride in never failing a delivery won out. I slipped the pack off my shoulders and carefully unzipped it. Inside was a small metal briefcase secured with a high-tech electronic lock. No wonder it was so heavy. I turned it over in my hands, looking for any clue as to its contents or owner. There, etched into the bottom corner in tiny letters, was a name: Prometheus Labs. My blood ran cold. Everyone in the city knew about Prometheus Labs, a shadowy research company rumored to be involved in everything from cutting-edge AI to government black ops. If they were mixed up in this, I was in way over my head. A car engine rumbled in the distance, growing louder. I quickly shoved the briefcase back into my pack and kicked my bike to life. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. As I rode through the silent streets, my mind raced through possibilities. I couldn't go home. They probably knew where I lived. The Swift Courier office was out too. I couldn't risk leading danger to my coworkers. I needed somewhere safe to lie low and figure out my next move. Somewhere off the grid where high-tech bad guys wouldn't think to look for a simple bike messenger. An idea struck me. My Uncle Joe's cabin in the mountains. It was only a couple hours' ride, and he'd given me a key for emergencies. This certainly qualified. Decision made, I pointed my bike towards the highway. The city lights faded behind me as I rode into the darkness, the mystery package a constant weight on my back. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to return to my normal life or if normal even existed anymore. But I did know one thing for certain. This was officially the worst delivery job ever. As the miles rolled by, my mind kept circling back to one burning question. What was in that briefcase? What could be so valuable or dangerous that people were willing to kill for it? Part of me hoped I'd never find out. A smaller, more reckless part couldn't wait to crack it open. Either way, I had a feeling my life would never be the same after tonight. All because of one impossible address and a package that was never meant to be delivered. 1313 Raven Street. A number that didn't exist on a street that did. Somehow I knew that solving that puzzle would be the key to unraveling this whole mystery. And as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I made a silent vow. I would find 1313 Raven Street, no matter what it took. And when I did, I'd finally get some answers. But first, I had to survive the night. And with the weight of Prometheus Labs' secrets on my back, that was far from a sure thing. The road stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt leading into an uncertain future. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. This was going to be one hell of a story to tell at the next Courier Christmas party. Assuming, of course, I lived long enough to tell it. Story 5. The fluorescent lights of the truck stop flickered, casting an eerie glow across the nearly empty parking lot. I stifled a yawn, glancing at the clock for what felt like the 100th time. 2:17 a.m. Still 4 hours to go on this godforsaken night shift. I'd been working at Pete's Pit Stop for 3 months now, and the novelty of the job, if you could call it that, had long since worn off. But bills needed paying, and night shift at a 24-hour truck stop paid better than flipping burgers at the local diner. The bell above the door chimed, jolting me from my thoughts. A man walked in, his face obscured by the brim of a worn baseball cap. He nodded in my direction before making a beeline for the coffee machine. Something about him set my nerves on edge. Maybe it was the way he moved, with a kind of coiled tension, or the fact that he was wearing sunglasses in the middle of the night. Who does that? "Help you with anything?" I called out, forcing a cheerful tone. He grunted in response, not bothering to look my way as he filled a large styrofoam cup with our questionable coffee. I shrugged, turning back to the magazine I'd been half-heartedly flipping through. The minutes ticked by in silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional rumble of a passing semi on the nearby highway. When I looked up again, the man was standing at the counter, coffee in hand. Up close, I could see that his clothes were rumpled and stained, as if he'd been wearing them for days. "Just the coffee," he mumbled, fishing in his pocket for change. As he counted out quarters, I caught a glimpse of his car through the window, an old sedan with out-of-state plates. The back seat was piled high with what looked like blankets or tarps, obscuring most of the rear window. A shiver ran down my spine, though I couldn't quite say why. Plenty of travelers passed through with cars full of junk, but something about this guy just felt off. "Long drive ahead?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual as I rang up his purchase. He stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Something like that," he replied, his tone clipped. I handed him his change, our fingers brushing for a moment. His hand was ice cold. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You work here often?" he asked, glancing back over his shoulder. "Most nights," I said, instantly regretting the admission. Why had I told him that? He nodded slowly. "See you around, then." The bell chimed again as he left, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Through the window, I watched him climb into his car. But he didn't drive away. Instead, he just sat there, engine off, staring straight ahead. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. He didn't move. I busied myself restocking shelves and wiping down counters, all the while keeping one eye on the motionless car. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew with each passing moment. At the half-hour mark, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my phone, finger hovering over the keypad. Should I call the cops? What would I even say? There's a weird guy sitting in the parking lot. They'd laugh me off the phone. Just as I was about to bite the bullet and make the call, the man's car door opened. He stepped out, stretching languidly as if he'd just woken from a nap. Then he turned and walked back towards the store. My heart raced as the bell chimed once more. "Forget something?" I asked, hating the way my voice quavered slightly. "Just need to use the restroom," he said, already heading towards the back of the store. I watched him go, my unease growing by the second. The bathrooms were around the corner, out of sight from the counter. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't relieved when I heard the door lock click into place. But as the minutes ticked by, that relief turned to renewed anxiety. How long does it take to use the bathroom? 15 minutes passed, then 20. The whole time I stood rooted to the spot behind the counter, straining my ears for any sound. Just as I was considering going to check on him, store policy be damned, I heard the bathroom door open. Footsteps approached, slow and measured. The man reappeared, looking no different than before, but now he was carrying something. A small duffel bag that I was certain he hadn't brought in with him. "Everything okay?" I asked, my mouth dry. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Fine, thanks." Without another word, he walked out, the bell's cheerful chime a stark contrast to the dread pooling in my stomach. This time, he didn't linger. The car's engine roared to life, and within moments, he was gone, taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding. Then, moving on autopilot, I walked to the bathroom. The smell hit me first, harsh chemicals that burned my nostrils. I flicked on the light, blinking in the sudden brightness. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but then I saw it, a smear of something dark on the edge of the sink. With trembling fingers, I touched it, then recoiled. It was sticky and warm. Blood. My mind raced. The duffel bag, the chemical smell, the long wait in the parking lot. It all added up to something terrible, something I didn't want to believe. I stumbled back to the counter, my legs weak. With shaking hands, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency, E? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I'm at Pete's pit stop off Highway 20. I think something bad has happened. There was a man, he was acting strange, and now there's blood in the bathroom. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars filled the parking lot, their lights painting everything in alternating red and blue. I answered questions until my throat was raw, describing the man, his car, every detail I could remember. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the now bustling truck stop, a detective pulled me aside. "You did the right thing calling us," he said, his face grim. "We've put out an APB on the vehicle, but I need you to understand something. The man you saw, he matches the description of a suspect we've been tracking for weeks. Multiple disappearances across 3 states." My blood ran cold. "Disappearances?" The detective nodded. "We think he's been using truck stops and rest areas to find victims, lone travelers, people who wouldn't be missed right away." I thought of the pile of blankets in his back seat, the duffel bag he'd left with. My stomach churned. "We're going to need to keep the store closed for a while," the detective continued. "Process it for evidence. And we'll need you to come down to the station, make a formal statement." I nodded numbly, barely hearing him. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying every moment of my interaction with the man. Had I missed something? Could I have done more? As if reading my thoughts, the detective placed a hand on my shoulder. "You couldn't have known. But your call might just help us catch this guy before he hurts anyone else. You did good, kid." His words were meant to be comforting, but they rang hollow in my ears. All I could think about was how close I'd come to becoming another statistic, another face on a missing persons poster. The sun climbed higher in the sky as I sat on the curb watching the organized chaos of the crime scene. Uniformed officers came and went, evidence bags were filled, photos were taken. And through it all, I couldn't shake the image of that man's face, or rather, the careful blankness of it. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that I'd remember that face for the rest of my life. In my nightmares, in quiet moments when my guard was down, those hidden eyes behind dark sunglasses would be watching me. As a police car pulled up to take me to the station, I made a silent vow. No more night shifts, no more lonely jobs in the middle of nowhere. Life was too short, too precious to spend it in the company of shadows and secrets. The detective had called me a hero, said I might have saved lives. But as I climbed into the back of the cruiser, all I felt was a bone-deep weariness and a newfound wariness of the darkness. Because now I knew, sometimes, the monsters that lurk in the night wear sunglasses and drink bad coffee, and they're always watching, waiting for their chance to strike. The slam of the car door felt like punctuation on the end of a chapter. As we pulled away from Pete's pit stop, I couldn't help but wonder, what would the next chapter bring? And more importantly, would I be ready for it? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, I'd never look at a night shift the same way again. Story 6. The fluorescent lights of the truck stop flickered, casting an eerie glow across the nearly empty parking lot. I stifled a yawn, glancing at the clock for what felt like the 100th time. 2:17 a.m., still 4 hours to go on this godforsaken night shift. I'd been working at Pete's Pit Stop for 3 months now, and the novelty of the job, if you could call it that, had long since worn off. But bills needed paying, and night shift at a 24-hour truck stop paid better than flipping burgers at the local diner. The bell above the door chimed, jolting me from my thoughts. A man walked in, his face obscured by the brim of a worn baseball cap. He nodded in my direction before making a beeline for the coffee machine. Something about him set my nerves on edge. Maybe it was the way he moved, with a kind of coiled tension, or the fact that he was wearing sunglasses in the middle of the night. Who does that? "Help you with anything?" I called out, forcing a cheerful tone. He grunted in response, not bothering to look my way as he filled a large styrofoam cup with our questionable coffee. I shrugged, turning back to the magazine I'd been half-heartedly flipping through. The minutes ticked by in silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional rumble of a passing semi on the nearby highway. When I looked up again, the man was standing at the counter, coffee in hand. Up close, I could see that his clothes were rumpled and stained, as if he'd been wearing them for days. "Just the coffee," he mumbled, fishing in his pocket for change. As he counted out quarters, I caught a glimpse of his car through the window, an old sedan with out-of-state plates. The back seat was piled high with what looked like blankets or tarps, obscuring most of the rear window. A shiver ran down my spine, though I couldn't quite say why. Plenty of travelers passed through with cars full of junk. But something about this guy just felt off. "Long drive ahead?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual as I rang up his purchase. He stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Something like that," he replied, his tone clipped. I handed him his change, our fingers brushing for a moment. His hand was ice cold. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You work here often?" he asked, glancing back over his shoulder. "Most nights," I said, instantly regretting the admission. Why had I told him that? He nodded slowly. "See you around, then." The bell chimed again as he left, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Through the window, I watched him climb into his car. But he didn't drive away. Instead, he just sat there, engine off, staring straight ahead. Minutes passed, 5, then 10. He didn't move. I busied myself restocking shelves and wiping down counters, all the while keeping one eye on the motionless car. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew with each passing moment. At the half-hour mark, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my phone, finger hovering over the keypad. Should I call the cops? What would I even say? "There's a weird guy sitting in the parking lot." They'd laugh me off the phone. Just as I was about to bite the bullet and make the call, the man's car door opened. He stepped out, stretching languidly as if he'd just woken from a nap. Then he turned and walked back towards the store. My heart raced as the bell chimed once more. "Forget something?" I asked, hating the way my voice quavered slightly. "Just need to use the restroom," he said, already heading towards the back of the store. I watched him go, my unease growing by the second. The bathrooms were around the corner, out of sight from the counter. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't relieved when I heard the door lock click into place. But as the minutes ticked by, that relief turned to renewed anxiety. How long does it take to use the bathroom? 15 minutes passed, then 20. The whole time I stood rooted to the spot behind the counter, straining my ears for any sound. Just as I was considering going to check on him, store policy be damned, I heard the bathroom door open. Footsteps approached, slow and measured. The man reappeared, looking no different than before, but now he was carrying something, a small duffel bag that I was certain he hadn't brought in with him. "Everything okay?" I asked, my mouth dry. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Fine, thanks." Without another word, he walked out, the bell's cheerful chime a stark contrast to the dread pooling in my stomach. This time, he didn't linger. The car's engine roared to life, and within moments, he was gone, taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding. Then moving on autopilot, I walked to the bathroom. The smell hit me first, harsh chemicals that burned my nostrils. I flicked on the light, blinking in the sudden brightness. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But then I saw it, a smear of something dark on the edge of the sink. With trembling fingers, I touched it, then recoiled. It was sticky and warm. Blood. My mind raced. The duffel bag, the chemical smell, the long wait in the parking lot. It all added up to something terrible, something I didn't want to believe. I stumbled back to the counter, my legs weak. With shaking hands, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I'm at Pete's Pit Stop off Highway 20. I think something bad has happened. There was a man. He was acting strange, and now there's blood in the bathroom. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars filled the parking lot, their lights painting everything in alternating red and blue. I answered questions until my throat was raw, describing the man, his car, every detail I could remember. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the now bustling truck stop, a detective pulled me aside. "You did the right thing calling us," he said, his face grim. "We've put out an APB on the vehicle, but I need you to understand something. The man you saw, he matches the description of a suspect we've been tracking for weeks. Multiple disappearances across 3 states. My blood ran cold. Disappearances? The detective nodded. We think he's been using truck stops and rest areas to find victims. Lone travelers, people who wouldn't be missed right away. I thought of the pile of blankets in his back seat, the duffel bag he'd left with. My stomach churned. We're going to need to keep the store closed for a while, the detective continued. Process it for evidence. And we'll need you to come down to the station, make a formal statement. I nodded numbly, barely hearing him. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying every moment of my interaction with the man. Had I missed something? Could I have done more? As if reading my thoughts, the detective placed a hand on my shoulder. You couldn't have known, but your call might just help us catch this guy before he hurts anyone else. You did good, kid. His words were meant to be comforting, but they rang hollow in my ears. All I could think about was how close I'd come to becoming another statistic, another face on a missing persons poster. The sun climbed higher in the sky as I sat on the curb, watching the organized chaos of the crime scene. Uniformed officers came and went, evidence bags were filled, photos were taken, and through it all I couldn't shake the image of that man's face, or rather the careful blankness of it. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that I'd remember that face for the rest of my life. In my nightmares, in quiet moments when my guard was down, those hidden eyes behind dark sunglasses would be watching me. As a police car pulled up to take me to the station, I made a silent vow. No more night shifts, no more lonely jobs in the middle of nowhere. Life was too short, too precious to spend it in the company of shadows and secrets. The detective had called me a hero, said I might have saved lives. But as I climbed into the back of the cruiser, all I felt was a bone-deep weariness and a newfound wariness of the darkness. Because now I knew, sometimes, the monsters that lurk in the night wear sunglasses and drink bad coffee. And they're always watching, waiting for their chance to strike. The slam of the car door felt like punctuation on the end of a chapter. As we pulled away from Pete's Pit Stop, I couldn't help but wonder, what would the next chapter bring? And more importantly, would I be ready for it? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. I'd never look at a night shift the same way again. Story 7. All units, we have reports of a vehicle driving erratically on I-95 southbound. Blue sedan, license plate, Charlie Oscar Victor, 223. Approach with caution. The crackle of the radio pulled me from my caffeine-induced stupor. I'd been parked in the same spot for hours, my cruiser hidden behind an overpass column. Speed trap duty, the bane of every highway patrol officer's existence. But this was different. This was the kind of call that got the blood pumping. Dispatch, this is Officer Sarah Chen. I'm about 2 miles north of the reported location. I'm on it. I flicked on my lights and sirens, pulling onto the nearly empty highway. It was just past 2 a.m., that strange twilight hour when the only people on the road were truckers, drunks, and cops like me. The sedan appeared in my headlights within minutes, weaving between lanes like a drunk snake. I hung back, observing. The car would drift to the shoulder, overcorrect, then swerve across the center line. It was a miracle they hadn't hit anyone yet. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, I have visual on the vehicle attempting to initiate a traffic stop. I pulled up closer, lights flashing. Normally, this would be enough to get a driver's attention. But the blue sedan kept going, oblivious to my presence. I hit the siren. Once, twice, still nothing. Frowning, I accelerated, pulling alongside the car. The windows were tinted, but not so dark that I couldn't see inside. What I saw, or rather didn't see, made my blood run cold. There was no one in the driver's seat. I blinked hard, certain I must be seeing things. But no, the car was definitely empty. The steering wheel turned on its own, making minor corrections as the vehicle continued its erratic journey down the highway. What the hell? I muttered, easing off the gas and falling back behind the sedan. My mind raced through possibilities. Some kind of autopilot malfunction, a prank, or something more sinister. I keyed the radio again, my voice tighter than I'd like to admit. Dispatch, we have a situation here. The vehicle is unoccupied. There was a long pause before the dispatcher responded, confusion evident in her voice. Officer Chen, can you clarify? Did you say the vehicle is unoccupied? Affirmative, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the sedan. There is no visible driver. I repeat, no one is behind the wheel. Stand by, Officer Chen. Backup is en route. I followed the ghost car for several more miles, my sense of unreality growing with each passing moment. This was the kind of thing you saw in movies or read about in those trashy supermarket tabloids. It didn't happen in real life, and certainly not on my watch. The sedan took an exit ramp, slowing as it approached a red light. For a wild moment, I wondered if it would stop. It did, coming to a perfect halt at the line. I pulled up behind it, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was my chance. Whatever was going on, I needed to end it before someone got hurt. Dispatch, I'm going to attempt to approach the vehicle, I said, unclipping my holster as I stepped out of the cruiser. The night air was cool on my face as I walked towards the sedan, one hand on my gun. The car sat there, engine idling, as innocuous as any other vehicle on the road, except for the small detail of its missing driver. I approached the driver's side window, flashlight in hand. The tint made it difficult to see inside, but I could make out enough to confirm what I'd seen earlier. The car was empty. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the door handle. It was locked. I tapped on the window with my flashlight. This is the highway patrol. Open the door. No response. Not that I'd really expected one. The light turned green, and to my amazement, the car began to move again. I jumped back as it accelerated through the intersection, tires squealing. Shit! I sprinted back to my cruiser, heart pounding. As I peeled out after the sedan, I radioed in my position, trying to keep the edge of panic out of my voice. We were in a residential area now, the empty car navigating the streets with an unnerving precision. It took turns without signaling, rolled through stop signs, but always stayed just within the speed limit. Backup arrived in the form of 2 more patrol cars, their sirens piercing the quiet night. Together, we formed a rolling barricade around the sedan, trying to herd it to a stop. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The car slowed, drifting towards the curb. But just as I thought we had it cornered, it surged forward, squeezing through a gap between my cruiser and one of the others. Jesus Christ. I heard one of the other officers swear over the radio. The chase led us through quiet neighborhoods, past shuttered storefronts, and back onto the highway. All the while, the sedan maintained its bizarre pattern, reckless one moment, perfectly law-abiding the next. As we re-entered the highway, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. We were approaching a construction zone, the lanes narrowing between concrete barriers. "All units, be advised," I barked into the radio. "We're coming up on a work zone. Proceed with extreme caution." The sedan showed no signs of slowing as it entered the construction area. I held my breath, certain we were about to witness a horrific crash. But the car threaded the needle perfectly, squeezing through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. It was like watching a video game, the kind of precision driving that no human could replicate. We emerged from the construction zone, the sedan still frustratingly out of reach. But now something had changed. The car's movements were becoming more erratic, more desperate. It swerved violently, nearly clipping a guardrail. Then it overcorrected, fishtailing across 3 lanes of traffic. "It's losing control," I shouted, though whether to my fellow officers or to myself, I couldn't say. The sedan spun out, tires screeching as it careened towards the median. I braced for impact, certain this was the end of our bizarre chase. But at the last possible second, the car righted itself. And then, to my utter disbelief, it pulled over to the shoulder and came to a stop. For a long moment, none of us moved. The sedan sat there, hazard lights blinking innocently as if it hadn't just led us on a wild chase across half the county. "Approach with caution," I said into the radio, my voice barely above a whisper. We surrounded the car, guns drawn. I approached the driver's side once again, every nerve in my body screaming with tension. This time, when I tried the handle, the door opened. The interior was dark and silent. No driver, no passengers, nothing out of the ordinary save for a faint blue glow emanating from the dashboard. I leaned in closer, squinting at the car's infotainment screen. There, in pulsing blue letters, was a message. "Demonstration complete. Thank you for your participation." I staggered back, my mind reeling. What the hell did that mean? Who was behind this? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, the screen flickered, and a new message appeared. "Autonomous Vehicle Test Protocol Alpha classified. Please contact DoD for further information. DoD, Department of Defense." This had been some kind of military test? I looked around at my fellow officers, seeing my own confusion and disbelief mirrored in their faces. One of them let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, holstering his weapon, "I guess we know why there was no driver." As the adrenaline ebbed, I found myself torn between anger and awe. Anger at being used as an unwitting guinea pig in some covert operation. Awe at the technology I just witnessed. In the days that followed, there would be debriefings and non-disclosure agreements. Stern-faced men in dark suits would explain the importance of national security and the need for secrecy. But in that moment, standing on the side of the highway in the pre-dawn hours, all I could think was, the world just got a whole lot stranger. And my job? It was never going to be the same again. As I walked back to my cruiser, I couldn't help but laugh. All those hours of monotonous speed trap duty, and the most dangerous driver I'd encountered wasn't a driver at all. The future, it seemed, had arrived. And it didn't need a license to operate. Story 8. The warehouse loomed before me, a hulking behemoth of corrugated metal and shadows. I eased my rig into the loading bay, the familiar rumble of the engine doing little to calm my frayed nerves. Something about this job felt off from the start. "You Jackson?" a voice called out as I killed the engine. I nodded, climbing down from the cab. The man who'd spoken was built like a brick wall, with a neck as thick as my thigh and hands that looked like they could crush walnuts without breaking a sweat. "Follow me," he grunted, turning on his heel without waiting for a response. I trailed after him, my boots echoing on the concrete floor. The warehouse was cavernous, filled with stacks of crates and pallets shrouded in heavy tarps, but it was eerily quiet. No forklifts, no workers calling out to each other, just silence and shadows. We stopped in front of a large shipping container. It was unmarked, save for a series of numbers stenciled on the side in faded white paint. "This is your cargo," the man said, producing a thick envelope from his jacket. "Delivery instructions are inside. Don't open the container, don't ask questions, and don't be late." I took the envelope, its weight substantial, in my hand. "What am I hauling?" His eyes narrowed. What did I just say about questions? I held up my hands in surrender. "Right, sorry, force of habit." He grunted again, then turned to a nearby forklift. Within minutes, the container was loaded onto my trailer, secured with heavy chains. As I climbed back into my cab, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a huge mistake. But the number on that check, it was enough to pay off my rig and then some. Whatever was in that container, it was worth a small fortune to someone. I pulled out of the warehouse, the weight of the cargo noticeable as I navigated through the industrial district. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, unopened. Part of me wanted to rip it open right there, to know what I'd gotten myself into. But a larger part, the part that remembered lean times and repo men, kept my eyes on the road. It wasn't until I hit the interstate, the city lights fading in my rear view, that I finally gave in to curiosity. Keeping one hand on the wheel, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a thick wad of cash, my advance, I assumed, and a single sheet of paper with an address scrawled on it. No recipient name, no additional instructions, just an address in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. I frowned, plugging the location into my GPS. The estimated drive time made me wince. This was going to be a long haul through some of the most desolate stretches of highway in the country. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I settled into the familiar rhythm of the road, the drone of tires on asphalt almost meditative. But as the moon climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty landscape, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. It started as a low hum, barely audible over the engine noise. I might not have noticed it at all if not for the absolute silence of the desert night. But once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. I glanced in my mirrors, half expecting to see another vehicle. But the road behind me was empty, stretching out like a black ribbon under the starry sky. The hum grew louder, taking on a rhythmic quality. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat. My own heart began to race. It was coming from the container. Whatever was back there, it was alive. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, my mind racing through possibilities. Animals? But what kind of animal made a sound like that? Human trafficking? The thought made my stomach churn. I should pull over, I thought, call the cops. But then what? I was in the middle of nowhere, hauling God knows what for God knows who. And that check, the thumping grew more insistent, as if whatever was back there knew I was thinking about it. I pressed down on the accelerator, urging the rig to go faster, faster, away from the noise and the questions and the growing pit of dread in my stomach. Miles blurred by, marked only by the steady rhythm from the container and the pounding of my own heart. I was so focused on the road ahead, on putting distance between myself and whatever it was, that I almost missed the flashing lights in my mirror. Shit, I muttered, easing onto the shoulder. The patrol car pulled up behind me, its headlights harsh in my mirrors. I watched as a figure emerged, approaching my cab with measured steps. I rolled down the window, plastering on what I hoped was a casual smile. "Evening, officer. Something wrong?" The trooper, a woman I realized, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression, shined her flashlight into the cab. "License and registration, please. You were doing 85 in a 70 zone." I fumbled for my paperwork, acutely aware of the envelope full of cash on the seat beside me. And all the while, that incessant thumping continued from the container. The trooper frowned, cocking her head to the side. "Oh, what's that noise?" "Noise?" I said, my voice an octave higher than normal. "I don't hear anything." But even as the words left my mouth, the thumping grew louder, more frantic. It was as if whatever was back there knew we had company. The trooper's hand moved to her holster. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." My mind raced. If she opened that container, but what choice did I have? Slowly, I climbed down from the cab. The night air was cool on my sweat-slicked skin. "What are you hauling?" the trooper demanded, her eyes never leaving mine. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? I didn't even know myself. Suddenly, the thumping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. And then, from within the container came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A low, guttural growl followed by the screech of tearing metal. The trooper's eyes widened. "What the hell?" She never finished the sentence. The back of the container exploded outward, showering us with twisted shards of metal. And from within the darkness emerged something. It was massive, easily the size of a bear, but shaped all wrong. Too many limbs moving in ways that defied anatomy. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shift and ripple, never quite settling on a single form. For a moment, we all stood frozen, me, the trooper, and the thing. Then it let out another bone-chilling roar, and chaos erupted. The trooper fired, her shots echoing across the empty desert, but the bullets seemed to pass right through the creature as if it were made of smoke. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, my feet pounding the asphalt as I sprinted away from my truck, away from the monster, away from the biggest mistake of my life. Behind me, I heard screams, human and inhuman, cut short with a sickening finality. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly, not daring to look back. When I finally collapsed, gasping for air, the highway was silent once more. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of my truck's headlights, still idling on the shoulder. Of the trooper's car, there was no sign. I lay there on the cold ground, staring up at the stars, my mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. What had I been transporting? Where had it come from? And where, dear God, had it gone? As the adrenaline faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness, I knew one thing for certain. My life as I knew it was over. There would be questions, investigations, and somewhere out there something impossible and terrifying was loose in the world. All because I'd taken a job without asking questions. Because I'd been greedy, desperate for that big payday. As I watched the first hints of dawn lighten the eastern sky, I made a silent vow. If I survived this, if I somehow made it out of this desert alive, I was done with trucking, done with sketchy jobs and mysterious cargo. But first I had to figure out how to explain to the authorities that I'd lost my truck, a state trooper, and a monster that shouldn't exist. Somehow I didn't ask questions was going to cut it as an excuse. The sun crept higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. In the growing light, the events of the night seemed almost dreamlike, but the torn metal scattered across the highway, the missing patrol car, and the lingering echo of that inhuman roar were all too real. I picked myself up, dusted off my jeans, and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences awaited me, I'd face them, but I'd never, ever take a job without knowing exactly what was in my trailer again. Some cargo, it turns out, is better left undelivered. Story 9. The call came in just as I was about to clock out. Possible 10, 54 on Highway 16, mile marker 37. Abandoned vehicle, signs of distress. I sighed, holstering my weapon and grabbing my jacket. So much for getting home in time for dinner. 10-4, dispatch. I'm on my way. The sun was setting as I pulled onto Highway 16, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't so damn tired. 12 hours into a 10-hour shift, and now this. But that's the life of a highway patrol officer, always on call, always ready for the unexpected. I spotted the vehicle about a quarter-mile ahead. A red sedan pulled over on the shoulder. As I drew closer, I could see that the driver's side door was wide open. Not a good sign. I parked my cruiser about 20 feet behind the sedan, angling it slightly to protect the scene from oncoming traffic. Force of habit made me call in my position to dispatch before I stepped out. The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the abandoned car. My hand instinctively rested on my holster, another habit born from years on the job and too many close calls. "Hello?" I called out. "Highway Patrol, anyone here?" Silence answered me, broken only by the occasional whoosh of a passing car. I reached the open door and peered inside. The interior was a mess, papers strewn about, a purse upended on the passenger seat. The keys were still in the ignition. "Shit," I muttered. This was looking less like a simple breakdown and more like something else, something bad. I pulled out my flashlight, sweeping it across the car's interior. No blood, thank God, but there on the driver's seat, a cell phone. I picked it up carefully, pressing the home button. The screen lit up, revealing a background photo of a smiling woman with 2 young kids. A lump formed in my throat. Somewhere out there, those kids were wondering why Mommy hadn't come home yet. I set the phone aside and continued my search. The glove compartment yielded the usual registration, insurance papers, a half-empty pack of gum. Nothing out of the ordinary. I circled the car, looking for any signs of a struggle or accident. The bodywork was clean, no dents or scrapes that might indicate a collision. But as I reached the trunk, something caught my eye. There, barely visible in the fading light, was a smudge on the rear bumper. I leaned in closer, shining my flashlight on it. My stomach clenched. It was a handprint, smeared as if someone had grabbed the bumper while the car was moving. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reyes. I'm going to need backup and forensics at my location. Possible 207. Copy that, Officer Reyes. Backup is en route, ETA 15 minutes. I acknowledged the response, then turned my attention back to the scene. 15 minutes. A lot could happen in 15 minutes. My training kicked in. Secure the scene, preserve evidence, look for clues. I grabbed some crime scene tape from my cruiser and started marking off the area. As I worked, my mind raced through possibilities. Carjacking gone wrong, domestic dispute, or something worse. A predator stalking the highway, looking for vulnerable targets. I shook my head, trying to focus on the facts, not speculation. But I couldn't shake the image of that smiling family on the phone's background. They deserved answers. They deserved to have their loved one back. With the immediate area secured, I decided to widen my search. The shoulder of the highway was littered with the usual debris, fast food wrappers, cigarette butts, the occasional beer can. But about 50 feet from the car, something shiny caught my eye. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness. There, half hidden in the tall grass, was a woman's shoe. A high heel, red to match the abandoned car. My heart rate quickened. This was no longer just an abandoned vehicle. This was a crime scene. I marked the shoe's location with a small flag from my kit, careful not to disturb it. As I straightened up, a gust of wind rustled through the trees lining the highway. And that's when I heard it, a faint sound coming from the woods. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, a muffled cry barely audible over the sound of passing traffic. "Hello," I called out, louder this time. "This is the highway patrol. If you can hear me, call out." Silence. Then, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Help." I didn't hesitate. I radioed in my position and intention to enter the woods, then plunged into the underbrush. The forest was dense, the fading daylight barely penetrating the thick canopy. My flashlight beam seemed feeble against the encroaching darkness. Branches whipped at my face as I pushed forward, calling out every few steps. "Keep making noise," I shouted. "I'm coming to help you." I heard it again, closer this time. A woman's voice, hoarse and frightened. "Over here, please, help me." I veered towards the sound, my heart pounding. The underbrush thinned out slightly, opening into a small clearing. And there, huddled at the base of a large oak tree, was a woman. She looked up as I entered the clearing, her eyes wide with fear and relief. She was disheveled, her clothes torn, one foot bare. The missing shoe's mate. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed as I rushed to her side. I thought no one would find me." "It's okay," I said, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, then winced. "My ankle. I think it's sprained. I can't walk." I nodded, already shrugging off my jacket to wrap around her shoulders. "Can you tell me what happened?" Her story came out in fits and starts, punctuated by sobs. A flat tire, a man who stopped to help, the flash of a knife, her desperate flight into the woods. I radioed for an ambulance as she talked, keeping one eye on our surroundings. The perpetrator could still be out there, watching, waiting. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Sarah," she replied. "Sarah Connor." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman from the phone background, the mother of those two smiling kids. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me, "and I'm going to get you out of here, but first I need to know, did you see which way he went?" She shook her head. "No, I just ran. I'm sorry, I should have..." "Hey, no," I cut her off. "You did exactly the right thing. You survived. That's what matters." In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Backup, finally. But we weren't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. "Okay, Sarah, here's what we're going to do," I said, helping her to her feet. "I'm going to carry you out of here. It might hurt a bit, but we need to move fast. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, her jaw set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. I scooped her up in a fireman's carry, trying to be gentle with her injured ankle. Then, with one last glance around the clearing, I started back the way I came. The journey out of the woods seemed to take an eternity. Every shadow looked like a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a possible attacker. But finally, mercifully, we broke through the tree line. The highway was a hive of activity. 2 more patrol cars had joined mine, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. An ambulance was just pulling up, paramedics jumping out before it had fully stopped. As I handed Sarah over to the capable hands of the medical team, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. She was safe. Not unharmed, not unscarred, but alive and safe. One of my fellow officers jogged over, his face grim. "Reyes, you're not going to believe this. We just got a report of a similar attack 1 county over. Guy matches the same description." I nodded, my jaw clenching. "Put out an APB. I want every available unit on this. This son of a bitch isn't going to get away with it." As I watched the ambulance pull away, Sarah's tear-streaked face visible through the rear window, I made a silent promise. To her, to those kids in the photo, to every driver who traveled this highway. We'd catch this bastard. And until we did, I'd be out here night after night, watching, waiting, protecting. Because sometimes the real monsters aren't in the woods. They're right here on the highway, hiding in plain sight. And it's up to us, the thin blue line, to stop them. I turned back to my cruiser, my exhaustion forgotten. The night was still young and there was work to be done. Story 10. The old truck stop diner smelled of burnt coffee and decades of grease. I hunched over my plate of rubbery eggs, trying to ignore the ache in my lower back. 18 hours behind the wheel, and I still had another day's drive ahead of me. But that's the life of a long-haul trucker. Endless miles, bad food, and the constant hum of tires on asphalt. I was just about to signal the waitress for a refill when I overheard it. Two guys in the booth behind me talking in low voices. Special delivery. Boss says it's got to be there by Thursday. No excuses. What's the cargo? Don't ask, don't tell. That's the policy. But let's just say it's worth more than you or I'll make in a lifetime. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. In my line of work, you learn to keep your head down and your ears open. But this sounded like trouble with a capital T. The voices continued, oblivious to my eavesdropping. Which rig is it going in? The blue Peterbilt. You know, the one with the dent in the front fender. My blood ran cold. They were talking about my truck. I forced myself to breathe normally, to act casual as I signaled for my check. My mind was racing. What the hell had I gotten myself into? The job had seemed straightforward enough when my dispatcher called yesterday. A long-haul run from Atlanta to Los Angeles, decent pay, nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I thought. I paid my bill and walked out into the pre-dawn chill, my legs stiff from sitting too long. The parking lot was a sea of semis, their chrome glinting in the harsh fluorescent lights. And there at the far end was my rig, the blue Peterbilt with the dented fender. As I approached, I noticed something different. The seal on my trailer had been changed. A new high-tech looking lock had been attached, complete with a blinking red light. I climbed into the cab, my hand shaking slightly as I turned the key. The familiar rumble of the engine did little to calm my nerves. What was in that trailer? Drugs? Weapons? Whatever it was, I wanted no part of it. But as I pulled out onto the highway, the first rays of sunlight peeking over the horizon, I realized I didn't have much choice. In this business, asking too many questions was a good way to end up unemployed, or worse. The miles rolled by, the monotony of the road usually a comfort, now a source of growing anxiety. Every passing car, every highway patrol cruiser sent a jolt of panic through me. Did they know what I was carrying? Were they coming for me? At a rest stop in Tennessee, I made a call to my dispatcher. Maybe he could shed some light on this mysterious cargo. Hey, Bill, it's Mike. Just wondering if you had any more details on this run to L.A. What's to know? Bill's gruff voice crackled over the line. You pick up the load, you deliver it. Same as always. Right, but the cargo. Anything unusual about it? There was a pause long enough to make me sweat. Mike, Bill said finally, his voice low and serious. Do yourself a favor. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Just get it there on time, understand? The line went dead before I could respond. Back on the road, my paranoia grew. I kept glancing in my mirrors, convinced I was being followed. A black SUV 3 cars back, a nondescript sedan that had been behind me for the last 50 miles. Were they watching me? Making sure I didn't try to ditch the cargo? By the time I hit Arkansas, I was a nervous wreck. Every bump in the road made me flinch, imagining whatever was in my trailer shifting, maybe breaking open. What if it was something alive? The thought made my skin crawl. I needed to know. I couldn't drive another 1,000 miles like this. At a truck stop outside Little Rock, I made my decision. I'd open the trailer, just take a quick peek. Better to know what I was dealing with, even if I didn't like the answer. I parked at the far end of the lot, away from prying eyes. My hands were sweating as I approached the trailer, bolt cutters hidden under my jacket. This was it, moment of truth. The lock put up more resistance than I expected. I strained against the bolt cutters, muscles trembling with the effort. Just as I thought it might be impossible, there was a sharp crack, and the lock fell away. Heart pounding, I eased the trailer door open a few inches. The interior was dark, filled with large, shrink-wrapped pallets, nothing obviously sinister. I was about to breathe a sigh of relief when I noticed something odd. One of the pallets was humming. A soft, almost imperceptible vibration. I reached out, my curiosity overcoming my fear. My fingers had barely brushed the plastic wrap when a voice behind me made me jump. I wouldn't do that if I were you, friend. I spun around, coming face to face with 2 men in dark suits. They hadn't been there a moment ago, I was sure of it. Where the hell had they come from? "Who are you?" I stammered, trying to subtly push the trailer door closed behind me. The taller of the two smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say we're interested parties, making sure our investment reaches its destination safely." "Look," I said, holding up my hands, "I don't want any trouble. I'm just doing my job." "And we appreciate that," the other man said. His voice was friendly, but there was an undercurrent of threat. "So why don't you get back in that cab and keep doing it? No more unscheduled stops. No more curiosity." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I climbed back into my truck, I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't relax until they were out of sight in my rearview mirror. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of caffeine and paranoia. I drove straight through, stopping only for fuel. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every passing car a potential tail. When I finally pulled into the delivery address, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles, I was running on fumes and frayed nerves. A team of men in hazmat suits swarmed my trailer as soon as I parked. They worked with practiced efficiency, unloading the pallets onto waiting trucks. I caught glimpses of strange machinery pulsing with an eerie blue light. As the last pallet disappeared into the warehouse, one of the suited men approached me. He handed me a thick envelope. "For your trouble," he said, "and your discretion." I opened it later in the safety of a motel room 50 miles away. It contained more cash than I'd ever seen in my life. Enough to retire on, to start over somewhere new. But as I lay there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I knew the money came with strings. I was in deep now, whether I liked it or not. Whatever I'd transported, whoever these people were, they knew who I was. Where to find me? I thought about the humming pallet, the strange blue glow. Government tech, alien artifacts, or something even stranger? Part of me wanted to run, to disappear and never look back. But a smaller, darker part was intrigued. The money was good, better than I'd ever make on normal runs. And the thrill, the danger, it was intoxicating in its own way. As dawn broke over the Los Angeles skyline, I made my decision. I'd take another job if they offered. But this time, I'd be prepared. I'd keep my eyes open, gather information. Maybe, just maybe, I could figure out what was really going on. Because one thing was clear, I'd stumbled into something big, something that went way beyond simple trucking. And for better or worse, I was now a part of it. I picked up my phone and dialed Bill's number. "Hey," I said when he answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Got any more of those special deliveries?" There was a long pause, then, "I'll be in touch." As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed a deal with the devil. But then again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions and apparently very well-paid truckers. Whatever came next, one thing was certain. My days of hauling mundane cargo were over. The open road ahead was full of mystery, danger, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. And me? I was along for the ride. Story 11, the stench hit me first. Rotting food, wet cardboard, and something else, something sour and vaguely chemical. Just another lovely bouquet for a garbage truck worker at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been doing this job for 3 years, and I still wasn't used to the smell. I hopped off the back of the truck, my boots hitting the damp pavement with a soft thud. It was that weird twilight hour, not quite night, not quite day. The kind of time when the world feels empty, and anything seems possible. "Hurry up, Jake," Mike called from the cab. "We're behind schedule." I waved him off, trudging towards the first bin of the day, a hulking green dumpster overflowing with trash bags and discarded furniture. Lovely. As I started to wheel it towards the truck, something caught my eye. A laptop perched precariously on top of a mound of garbage. It looked relatively new, its sleek silver case glinting in the weak morning light. "Huh," I muttered, reaching for it. People threw away the craziest things sometimes. The laptop's lid was slightly open. Out of habit, or maybe just morbid curiosity, I flipped it up. The screen flickered to life, revealing a Word document. The title at the top made my blood run cold. Operation Nightfall Execution Plan. My eyes skimmed the first few lines, and I felt my stomach lurch. This wasn't some half-finished novel or college essay. This was a detailed plan for what looked like a terrorist attack. Targets, timelines, weapons, it was all there in horrifying detail. "Jake, what's the holdup?" Mike's voice snapped me back to reality. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. What the hell was I supposed to do with this? Sorry, I called back, shoving the laptop into my jacket. Dumpster's stuck. Give me a minute. I wheeled the bin to the truck on autopilot, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Should I call the cops? But what if this was just some sick joke? Or worse, what if it was real and whoever wrote it realized they'd thrown it away by mistake? As the dumpster's contents crashed into the truck, I scanned the street. It all looked normal. Quiet houses, parked cars, a stray cat slinking along a fence. But now every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. I was about to climb back onto the truck when I saw it. A car parked halfway down the block. Its engine was running, a thin trail of exhaust visible in the cool morning air. And behind the wheel, a figure sat motionless, watching. My heart began to race. It could be nothing. An early riser warming up their car before work. But my gut told me otherwise. I forced myself to act natural, giving Mike a thumbs up as I moved to the next bin. But my eyes kept darting back to the car. Was it my imagination, or had it inched closer? 2 more stops, and I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see what was on that laptop. Needed to know if I was panicking over nothing, or if I'd stumbled into something deadly serious. "Hey, Mike," I called. "I'm going to take my break now, all right?" He grunted in acknowledgement, too focused on his coffee and morning crossword to care. I jogged down a side street, ducking into the shadow of an old oak tree. With shaking hands, I pulled out the laptop and opened it. The document was still there, its innocent white background belying the horrors it contained. I forced myself to read it properly this time, fighting down the bile rising in my throat. It was worse than I'd initially thought. Names, addresses, detailed schematics of government buildings. This wasn't just a plan, it was a manifesto. A blueprint for chaos. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, the laptop nearly slipping from my grasp. There, at the end of the street, was the car. And now, a man was getting out. He was tall, dressed all in black, his face hidden by the brim of a baseball cap. And in his hand, unmistakable even at this distance, was a gun. Panic surged through me. I slammed the laptop shut and ran, my feet pounding the pavement. I could hear footsteps behind me, gaining ground with every second. I turned a corner, then another, my lungs burning. Where the hell was I going? I couldn't lead this guy back to Mike and the truck. But I needed help, My foot caught on an uneven bit of sidewalk, and I went down hard. The laptop skittered across the ground, coming to rest against a storm drain. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. A hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. I found myself staring down the barrel of a gun. "The laptop," the man said, his voice low and menacing. "Hand it over and you might walk away from this." I raised my hand slowly, trying to control my ragged breathing. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I'm just a garbage man. I didn't see anything, I swear." His eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I saw you reading it. Now where is it?" My mind raced. The laptop was just a few feet away, hidden from his view by my body. If I could just distract him for a moment. Okay, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "It's in my jacket. Just don't shoot, all right?" I started to reach into my jacket, moving as slowly as I could. The man's eyes followed my hand, his gun never wavering. Now or never. I lunged to the side, my hand closing around a discarded beer bottle. I hurled it at his face with all my strength. He ducked, the bottle shattering against the wall behind him. But those precious seconds of distraction were all I needed. I dove for the laptop, scooping it up and rolling towards the storm drain. Before he could react, I shoved it through the grate. The man roared in fury, charging towards me, but the sound of screeching tires made us both freeze. A police cruiser rounded the corner, lights flashing. The officer behind the wheel looked as surprised to see us as we were to see him. For a moment, everything was still. Then the man in black turned and ran, disappearing down an alley before the cop could even open his door. "Are you all right, sir?" the officer asked, approaching cautiously. "We got a call about a suspicious person in the area." I nodded, my legs suddenly feeling like jelly. "Yeah, I think so, but officer, you're going to want to call for backup. And maybe the FBI?" The next few hours passed in a blur. More cops arrived, then men in suits who didn't smile and asked a lot of questions. They fished the laptop out of the drain, whisking it away in an evidence bag. I told my story over and over, each retelling making it feel a little less real. By the time they finally let me go, the sun was high in the sky and my shift had long since ended. Mike was waiting for me at the depot, worry etched on his weathered face. "Jesus, Jake, where the hell have you been? I've been calling for hours." I managed a weak smile. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But as I climbed into my car to head home, the events of the morning came crashing down on me. I'd found a terrorist plot. I'd been chased, threatened at gunpoint. I might have just helped prevent something terrible. All because I decided to check out a discarded laptop. I thought about quitting right then and there, going home, packing a bag, and driving until this crazy city was just a speck in my rearview mirror. But then I thought about all the other things people throw away, all the secrets hidden in the trash, and I realized someone needs to be there to find them, to do something about them. Maybe that someone was me. I started the engine, pointing my car towards home. Tomorrow, I decided I'd be back on that truck. A little more watchful, a little more wary, but ready. Because you never know what you might find in the garbage, and sometimes what you find might just change everything. As I pulled onto my street, a black SUV with tinted windows crawled past. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Just paranoia, I told myself. The excitement of the day getting to me. But as I walked to my front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That by fishing that laptop out of the trash, I'd opened a door that couldn't be closed. I looked back at the street, half expecting to see the man in black watching me. But there was nothing. Just an empty road and the fading light of day. With a deep breath, I unlocked my door and stepped inside. Whatever came next, I'd face it. After all, I was just a garbage man. But now I was a garbage man with a purpose. And in this crazy world, sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. Story 12. The red and blue lights pierced the darkness, reflecting off the wet asphalt like a disco ball from hell. I eased my patrol car onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. It was 2:37 a.m., and I was 3 hours into a mind-numbing graveyard shift. The car I'd pulled over was doing 85 in a 55 zone, weaving between lanes like a drunk snake. As I stepped out of my cruiser, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. It had been raining earlier, and the smell of wet pavement mixed with the earthy scent of the surrounding cornfields. Welcome to rural Indiana, where the roads are long, the nights are longer, and the most exciting thing that usually happens is Old Man Johnson's cows getting loose. I approached the vehicle cautiously, my right hand resting on my holster out of habit. It was a beat-up Honda Civic, at least a decade old, with out-of-state plates. Mississippi, if I wasn't mistaken. "Evening, folks," I called out, my voice carrying in the still night air. "License and registration, please." The driver's window rolled down with a screech that set my teeth on edge. The interior light flickered on, revealing a man in his mid-30s, unshaven and wild-eyed. He was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "Officer," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry about the speed. I need to get to Chicago. It's an emergency." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. In my 10 years on the force, I'd heard every excuse in the book. "I understand, sir, but the speed limit still applies. Can I see your license and registration?" He nodded frantically, fumbling in his pockets. That's when I noticed the movement in the back seat. Someone was back there, hidden under a blanket. My hand tightened on my holster. "Sir," I said, my voice taking on an edge of authority, "I'm going to need you to tell me who else is in the vehicle." The man froze, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. It's nobody. Just some luggage." "Luggage doesn't move on its own." I took a step back, unclipping my holster. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle now." For a moment I thought he might try to run. His body tensed, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head, weighing his options. But then his shoulders slumped, and he reached for the door handle. As he stumbled out of the car, I caught a whiff of something that made my nose wrinkle. Not alcohol, like I'd expected, but something metallic. Something that reminded me of crime scenes I'd rather forget. "Put your hands on the hood," I ordered, my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through my veins. He complied, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. I patted him down quickly, finding nothing but a wallet and a crumpled pack of cigarettes. But it was what I saw when I glanced into the car that made my blood run cold. The blanket in the back seat had shifted, revealing a pair of small, dirty sneakers. Kids' sneakers. "Sir," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm, "I'm going to need you to tell me who's in the back seat." and I want you to think very carefully about your answer." He didn't respond, just stood there with his head bowed, trembling slightly. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reyes. I'm going to need backup at mile marker 37 on Route 30. Possible 10. 31 with a minor involved. Copy that, Officer Reyes. Backup is en route. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It might as well have been 10 hours. I turned back to the man, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. Kidnapping, trafficking, or something even worse. "Last chance," I said, my voice hard. "Who's in the back seat?" He mumbled something I couldn't make out. "Speak up." "My daughter," he blurted out, his voice cracking. "It's my daughter, okay? But it's not what you think, I froze. This just got a whole lot more complicated. "Step away from the vehicle," I ordered, my gun now drawn. "Hands where I can see them." As he backed away, I approached the rear door. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. With my free hand, I reached for the door handle. "Sweetie," I called out softly. "It's okay, I'm a police officer. You can come out now." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the blanket shifted. A small face emerged, pale and frightened in the harsh glare of my flashlight. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old. "Hi there," I said, trying to keep my voice soothing. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her eyes darting between me and the man. "Can you tell me your name?" "Lily," she whispered. "Okay, Lily. Can you tell me who that man is?" I gestured towards the driver, who was now sitting on the ground, his head in his hands. "He's my daddy," she said, her voice small but clear. I felt a knot in my stomach start to loosen, but I wasn't out of the woods yet. "And did your daddy take you without asking? Is someone looking for you?" She looked confused. "No, we're going to see Grandma. Mommy said it was okay." I turned to the man, my gun still trained on him. "Is this true?" He nodded, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "My mother, she's in the hospital in Chicago. Had a stroke. My wife's out of the country on business, and I couldn't get a flight, so I just grabbed Lily and started driving. I know I screwed up, officer. I was just so scared." The pieces started to fall into place. The frantic driving, the nervous behavior, the desperation to get to Chicago, but something still didn't add up. "If this is all true," I said, "why were you trying to hide her?" He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Because I knew how it would look. Middle of the night, speeding. A kid hidden in the back seat. I panicked. I thought if I could just get to Chicago without being stopped." I holstered my weapon, my mind whirling. It was a plausible explanation, but I'd been burned before by believing sob stories. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right there while I verify your story. Lily, honey, can you come with me to my car? I promise you're not in trouble. I just need to ask you a few questions." The next 10 minutes were tense. I kept one eye on the man while I radioed in to check his story. Lily sat in my cruiser, answering my questions with a frankness only a child could manage. Yes, they were going to see Grandma. No, Daddy hadn't done anything scary. Yes, she was hungry because they hadn't stopped for dinner. Just as backup arrived, lights flashing, my radio crackled to life. The man's story checked out. His mother was indeed in the hospital in Chicago. His wife confirmed she knew about the trip. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, followed quickly by a pang of guilt. I'd been ready to assume the worst, to potentially tear a family apart. As I explained the situation to my backup, I watched the man scoop Lily into his arms, holding her tight. There were tears in his eyes as he whispered apologies into her hair. I approached them, my demeanor now considerably softened. "Sir, I'm not going to ticket you for the speeding, but I can't in good conscience let you continue driving in your current state. You're exhausted and emotional. It's not safe for you or for Lily." He nodded, looking defeated. "There's a motel about a mile up the road," I continued. "I want you to get a room, get some rest. In the morning, if you feel up to it, you can continue your trip. If not, let me know, and we'll figure something out." "Okay." The gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to see. "Thank you, officer. I don't know what to say." I waved him off, suddenly uncomfortable with his thanks. I was just doing my job, after all, a job that tonight had reminded me of its complexity, its potential for both darkness and light. As I watched them drive away, following my colleague's cruiser to the motel, I couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. How close we'd come to tragedy, all because of assumptions and fear. I climbed back into my patrol car, the rest of my shift stretching out before me. But now the dark road ahead didn't seem so monotonous. It was full of possibilities, both good and bad, waiting to be uncovered. Because out here, in the dead of night on a lonely stretch of highway, you never really know what the next set of headlights might bring. And it's our job, my job, to be ready for anything. Story 13. The guard at the gate barely glanced at my ID before waving me through. His eyes were hollow, dark circles underneath, speaking of too many night shifts and not enough sleep. I knew the feeling all too well. As I guided my rig into the loading bay, something felt off. The facility was unlike any I'd seen in my 15 years of trucking. No company logos, no signs, just a sprawling complex of featureless gray buildings surrounded by a fence topped with razor wire. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces as blank as the walls around them. I'd picked up plenty of loads from high-security sites before, military bases, tech companies with trade secrets to protect. But this was something else entirely. A man in a crisp suit approached as I killed the engine. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Mr. Johnson. I'll be overseeing your pickup today." I nodded, climbing down from the cab. "What's the cargo?" His smile tightened. "I'm afraid that's classified. You'll be transporting a sealed container. Under no circumstances is it to be opened or tampered with. Is that clear?" A knot formed in my stomach. In my experience, nothing good ever came in unmarked boxes with strict do-not-open orders. But the pay for this job was too good to pass up, enough to finally put a down payment on that little house by the lake I'd been eyeing. "Crystal clear," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. The loading process was quick and efficient. A large rectangular container was wheeled out and secured in my trailer. It was featureless save for a series of blinking lights along one side. No markings, no shipping labels, nothing to hint at its contents. As the doors of my trailer were sealed shut, Mr. Johnson handed me a thick envelope. "Your route is programmed into the GPS. Do not deviate from it. Do not stop unless absolutely necessary. And remember, Mr. Thompson, what you're carrying is of utmost importance to national security. We'll be monitoring your progress closely." The weight of his words settled on my shoulders like a physical thing. What the hell had I gotten myself into? I climbed back into my cab, hands shaking slightly as I started the engine. As I pulled out of the facility, I caught sight of Mr. Johnson in my side mirror. He was speaking into a cell phone, his eyes never leaving my departing truck. The first few hours on the road were uneventful. The GPS guided me onto highways I'd driven 100 times before, the familiar landscape of the American Midwest rolling by outside my windows. But as night fell and the miles ticked by, my unease grew. It started as a feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck like I was being watched. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see a convoy of black SUVs tailing me. But the road behind was empty save for the occasional passing car. Then I noticed the sound. At first I thought it was just road noise, the usual creaks and groans of a heavily laden truck. But as I focused on it, I realized it was coming from the trailer, a low, pulsing hum just on the edge of hearing. I turned off the radio, straining my ears. There it was again, a rhythmic thrumming, almost like a heartbeat. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. What the hell was back there? I thought about pulling over, maybe taking a peek inside the trailer, but Mr. Johnson's warning echoed in my mind. Under no circumstances is it to be opened or tampered with. I white-knuckled the steering wheel and pressed on. As midnight approached, I hit a stretch of road that was pitch black, no streetlights or signs of civilization for miles. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent, and now there was something else. A scratching sound like something trying to claw its way out. My heart raced. I fumbled for my phone, thinking to call my dispatcher, to tell someone what was happening. But as soon as I picked it up, a message flashed across the screen. "No outside communication allowed. Stick to the route." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. They were watching. Somehow they knew. The scratching intensified, accompanied now by a series of dull thumps. Whatever was in that container, it was alive, and it wanted out. I was nearing my breaking point, ready to pull over and to hell with the consequences when I saw the lights in my mirror. A car was approaching fast, eating up the distance between us like it was standing still. Relief flooded through me. Another person, someone I could talk to, someone who could verify that I wasn't going crazy. But as the car drew closer, that relief turned to ice in my veins. It was a black SUV, its headlights burning like accusing eyes in the darkness. It pulled alongside me, keeping pace effortlessly. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a man in a dark suit and sunglasses. Even at night, even at 70 miles per hour, he wore sunglasses. He held up a sign, "Maintain course and speed, do not stop." I nodded frantically, too terrified to do anything else. The SUV fell back, taking up position behind my truck. For the next 100 miles, we continued this way. Me in the lead, the silent guardians behind. All the while, the noises from my trailer grew more frantic, more desperate. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, we entered the mountains. The road became a twisting serpent of asphalt, hugging cliff sides and skirting steep drop-offs. Under normal circumstances, I would have slowed to a crawl, but the SUV behind me left no room for caution. We took the curves at breakneck speed, my truck swaying dangerously with each turn. The container in my trailer shifted and banged, the sounds from within now a constant, frenzied cacophony. As we rounded a particularly sharp bend, I felt the trailer begin to tip. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure we were going over the edge, but somehow, miraculously, the wheels gripped the road and we stayed upright. But the near miss had done something. As we leveled out, I heard a new sound from the trailer, the unmistakable noise of tearing metal. In my mirror, I saw the SUV's driver speaking urgently into a radio. Whatever was happening, it wasn't part of the plan. Suddenly, the back doors of my trailer burst open. Something huge and dark spilled out onto the road behind me. The SUV swerved wildly, trying to avoid it, but there was no time. There was a sickening crunch of metal on metal, and the SUV careened off the road, disappearing over the edge of the cliff. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt in a cloud of burning rubber and brake dust. For a long moment I sat there, hands shaking, breath coming in ragged gasps. Slowly, reluctantly, I climbed out of the cab. The mountain air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the sweat-soaked interior of my truck. I walked to the back of the trailer on unsteady legs, dreading what I might find. The doors hung open, twisted and bent. The container inside was split down the middle like an enormous metal egg that had been cracked open, and it was empty. Whatever had been inside was gone. I approached the edge of the cliff, peering down at the wreckage of the SUV far below. There was no movement, no sign of survivors. As the full weight of what had happened began to sink in, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl coming from the thick forest that lined the road. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, at the tree line, I caught a glimpse of something massive, a shape that defied description, all writhing tentacles and glistening scales. For a moment, a cluster of eyes fixed on me, ancient alien eyes that held no trace of humanity or mercy. Then it was gone, crashing away into the underbrush, leaving only broken trees and an unearthly silence in its wake. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind struggling to process what I'd seen. When I finally moved, it was on autopilot. I climbed back into my cab, turned the key, and pointed the truck back the way we'd come. I didn't know what I'd been transporting. I didn't know who Mr. Johnson really was or what shadowy organization he worked for. And I sure as hell didn't know what was now loose in the mountains. But I did know one thing. I was done with trucking. Done with mysterious cargo and classified routes and things that went bump in the night. As I drove away from that mountain road, leaving behind the wreckage and the horror and the unknown, I made a silent vow. From now on, the only thing I'd be hauling was my fishing gear, to that little house by the lake that suddenly seemed like the safest place in the world, because some loads are better left undelivered, and some questions are better left unanswered. Story 14. The first time I saw the car, I thought nothing of it. A silver sedan, unremarkable in every way, just another vehicle on the endless ribbon of highway stretching before me. But as the miles rolled by and the sun dipped below the horizon, that innocuous silver car became the center of my world, and the source of a terror I'd never known before. I'd left Chicago just after noon, the city's skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror as I pointed my old Honda Civic toward St. Louis. It was a drive I'd made a dozen times before, visiting my sister and her new baby. 6 hours of monotonous Midwest landscape, cornfields and billboards my only companions. The silver car first appeared somewhere in central Illinois. I noticed it only because we'd been leapfrogging each other for miles, taking turns passing as one of us stopped for gas or coffee. Just another road warrior making the trek down I-55, but as the afternoon wore on, I began to feel uneasy. Every time I checked my mirror, there it was. 3 cars back, 5 cars back, sometimes right behind me. Always there, never falling behind or pulling ahead for good. "You're being paranoid, Sarah," I muttered to myself, cranking up the radio to drown out my thoughts. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into the back of my head. At a rest stop just outside Springfield, I decided to test my theory. Instead of pulling back onto the highway, I took a state route heading east. It was a longer way to St. Louis, but if I was just being paranoid, I'd have shaken my imaginary tail. For 20 blissful minutes, I drove in peace. The knot in my stomach began to loosen. I was just tired, I told myself, letting my imagination run wild after one too many true crime podcasts. Then I saw it, cresting a hill behind me, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The silver sedan. My heart began to race. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was following me. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my old Civic faster than I'd ever dared on these winding back roads. The silver car kept pace effortlessly, always maintaining the same distance. Not trying to catch me, just following, watching. My palms were slick with sweat on the steering wheel as I fumbled for my phone. Who could I call? The police? And tell them what? That a car had been behind me for hours? They'd laugh me off the line. I tried my sister, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, the baby was probably napping. I thought about calling my parents, but the idea of worrying them made me hesitate. They'd already thought this trip was a bad idea, me driving alone. As I rounded a curve, a small town appeared ahead. A gas station stood on the outskirts, its fluorescent lights a beacon in the growing darkness. I made a split-second decision, yanking the wheel hard to the right and screeching into the parking lot. I killed the engine and ducked down in my seat, peering out the back window. The silver car cruised past slowly, brake lights flaring briefly before it disappeared down the road. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over. But as I sat up, relief flooding through me, I saw it. The silver car pulling into the parking lot from the other direction. It hadn't driven on. It had gone around the block. Panic clawed at my throat. I scrambled out of the car, nearly falling in my haste. The gas station's convenience store beckoned, promising safety in its harsh lighting and bored attendant. I burst through the door, the bell's cheerful jingle a stark contrast to the terror pounding in my veins. The clerk looked up from his phone, startled by my sudden entrance. "Are you okay, missa?" he asked, brow furrowed in concern. I opened my mouth to respond, to pour out my story of the relentless silver car when movement outside caught my eye. The sedan was pulling up to the pump nearest the door, blocking my car in. I need to use your bathroom," I stammered, already moving towards the back of the store. "And, is there a back door? For emergencies?" The clerk's frown deepened, but he pointed to a door marked, "Employees Only." I thanked him hurriedly and slipped through, finding myself in a small stockroom. And there, like a gift from the gods, was another door with a glowing exit sign. I burst out into the humid night air, gulping it down like I'd been drowning. The back of the gas station opened onto a residential street, quiet houses with neatly trimmed lawns lining either side. I picked a direction at random and started walking, then jogging, then full-out running. My feet pounded the sidewalk as I turned down one street, then another, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that silver car. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I slowed to a stop, hands on my knees as I gasped for breath. I was in a small park, empty save for an old man walking his dog. He gave me a curious look as he passed, probably wondering what a sweaty, wild-eyed woman was doing out here at this hour. I sank onto a bench, my mind racing. What was I going to do? My car was back at the gas station, along with my phone and all my belongings. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the cash in my pocket. As my breathing slowed and my pulse returned to something resembling normal, I tried to think rationally. I needed help. I needed to get to a police station to tell them what was happening. Surely they'd believe me now. This was more than just paranoia. I stood up, ready to ask the old man with the dog for directions to the nearest police station, but as I turned, my blood ran cold. There, at the entrance to the park, was the silver sedan. It sat there, engine idling, headlights off, watching, waiting. I felt like a deer in the headlights, frozen in place by fear and disbelief. How had they found me? It was impossible, unless... With trembling hands, I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers closed around something small and hard. I pulled it out, already knowing what I'd find. A tiny black disc, no bigger than a button, a tracking device. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't been following my car. They'd been following me. As I stood there, the tracker feeling like it weighed a ton in my palm, the driver's door of the silver car opened. A figure stepped out, tall, nondescript, face hidden in the shadows. They started walking towards me, their pace unhurried, confident, a predator who knew their prey was cornered. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I turned and ran deeper into the park, away from the lights and into the sheltering darkness of a stand of trees. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. I ran until the park gave way to more residential streets, then to a commercial area with darkened storefronts and empty parking lots. And all the while I knew it was futile. They had tracked me this far. They would find me again. As I leaned against a brick wall, trying to catch my breath, a thought struck me. I didn't know who they were or why they were after me. I was just a normal person, an accountant from Chicago, for God's sake. I wasn't important. I didn't know any secrets. I wasn't wealthy or connected or... My train of thought screeched to a halt as a memory surfaced. 3 weeks ago, leaving work late one night. The mugging I'd interrupted, the flash of a knife, my pepper spray sending the attacker running. The victim, an older man in an expensive suit, had been effusively grateful. He'd pressed his card into my hand, insisting I call if I ever needed anything. I'd nodded politely and forgotten about it almost immediately, but now I wondered. Who was he really? What had I unwittingly gotten myself involved in? The sound of an engine purring to life nearby snapped me back to the present. The silver car was coming. I pushed off from the wall, ready to run again, when I spotted it. A 24-hour diner across the street, its neon open sign a beacon of hope. I sprinted across the empty road, yanking the diner's door open and nearly falling inside. The handful of patrons looked up in surprise, a couple of truckers, a group of teenagers, a woman nursing a coffee at the counter. "Please," I gasped, my eyes wild. "I need help. Someone's after me." As the waitress reached for the phone, presumably to call the police, I saw the silver car pull into the parking lot. The driver's door opened, but this time I wasn't afraid. This time I was ready. Because whoever these people were, whatever they wanted, they had made one crucial mistake. They had let me get to other people, to witnesses, to help. As blue and red lights began to flash in the distance, I sank into a booth, finally allowing myself to breathe. The long night wasn't over. There would be questions, investigations, probably danger still to come. But for now, for this moment, I was safe. And as the diner's door chimed open, admitting not my pursuer but a uniformed police officer, I felt something I hadn't felt in hours. Hope. The silver car might have followed me across half the state, but its journey ended here. And mine was just beginning. Story 15. The stench hit me first. Rancid and coppery, it cut through the usual miasma of rotting garbage and stale rainwater. I'd been on this job for 5 years, and I thought I'd smelled it all. I was wrong. My partner, Mike, was already retching behind the truck. Rookie move, he'd barely made it 3 months on the job. I swallowed hard, fighting my own gag reflex as I approached the dumpster. It was 4:37 a.m., that weird twilight hour when the city was caught between the late-night stragglers and early morning risers. Our garbage route took us through the heart of downtown, usually a mind-numbing procession of overflowing bins and illegally dumped furniture. But this was different. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. The dumpster was halfway full, nothing unusual there. But as I swept the light across its contents, I saw it, a dark stain on the metal side, still wet and glistening. "Mike," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "Get over here and bring the radio." He stumbled over, face pale in the harsh glow of the streetlights. "What is it, Jack?" I didn't answer, just pointed my light at the ground. A trail of dark droplets led from the dumpster to a nearby storm drain. Blood. It had to be blood. Mike's eyes widened. "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh..." "Shut up and call it in," I snapped, harsher than I meant to. But panic was starting to claw at the edges of my mind, and I needed him functional. As Mike fumbled with the radio, I crouched down to examine the trail. The droplets were small but consistent, leading in a straight line to the drain. Whatever or whoever was bleeding had been moving with purpose. A scraping sound from the drain made me jump. I swung my flashlight towards it, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. Nothing, just the rusty grate and the impenetrable darkness beyond. "Dispatch says to secure the area and wait for the cops," Mike reported, his voice shaky. "They're sending a unit now." I nodded, not taking my eyes off the drain. "Okay, you stay here, keep an eye on things. I'm going to check the alley." "What, Jack, we're supposed to wait." But I was already moving, following the blood trail backwards. It led me to a narrow alley between two buildings, the kind of place that always smelled like piss and broken dreams. The trail continued, more pronounced here, away from the street. Larger droplets, small smears on the brick walls, signs of a struggle. My flashlight caught something pale amidst the gloom. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a hand, a human hand, small and delicate, poking out from behind a stack of pallets. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the close walls. "This is the sanitation department. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" No response. I inched forward, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. But I couldn't, not if someone was hurt, not if there was a chance I could help. I rounded the pallets, flashlight beam trembling slightly. The hand belonged to a young woman. She was curled on her side, blonde hair matted with blood and grime. Her eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the alley wall. My stomach lurched. I'd seen dead bodies before, overdoses mostly, the occasional homeless person who didn't survive a cold night. But this was different. This was violence. I fumbled for my phone, fingers numb as I dialed 911. As it rang, I swept my light around the scene, looking for anything that might help the police. That's when I saw the second trail. It led away from the body towards the far end of the alley. But this wasn't blood. This was something else. A viscous, dark fluid that seemed to shimmer slightly in the beam of my flashlight. The 911 operator's voice snapped me back to reality. I reported what I'd found, my own voice sounding distant and strange to my ears. "Sir, police are en route to your location," the operator said. "Please remain where you are and do not touch anything." I mumbled an acknowledgement and ended the call. I knew I should go back to Mike, to the relative safety of the street and our garbage truck. But that other trail, it pulled at me. A mystery I couldn't ignore. Before I could second-guess myself, I was moving, following the strange fluid deeper into the maze of alleys that honeycombed this part of the city. The trail led me on a winding path, sometimes clear, sometimes fading to almost nothing before reappearing. I lost track of time, the pre-dawn gloom giving way to the first tentative rays of sunlight. I was so focused on the ground, on following that otherworldly trail, that I almost missed it. A sound so faint I thought I might have imagined it. A low, pained groan, like an animal in distress. It was coming from a half-open door set into the brick wall of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Every cop show I'd ever watched screamed at me to wait for backup, to not enter a possible crime scene alone and unarmed. But that sound, it tugged at something primal in me, something that couldn't ignore a creature in pain. I pushed the door open wider, wincing at the screech of rusted hinges. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there? Are you hurt? Oh!" Another groan, louder this time, definitely coming from inside. I stepped into the warehouse, my flashlight beam seeming feeble in the cavernous space. Broken machinery loomed like prehistoric skeletons. Dust motes danced in the shafts of early morning light streaming through grimy windows. The trail led to a heap of old tarps in the corner. As I approached, the pile shifted and I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't human. Whatever was under those tarps, it wasn't human. I saw a flash of scales, a cluster of eyes that reflected my flashlight like a cat's. Then it was gone, burrowing deeper under the covering. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It was impossible. It had to be a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But then it spoke. "Help me." The voice was raspy, barely recognizable as speech, but the pain in it was unmistakable. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run, but something else, something deeper, kept me rooted to the spot. What are you?" I managed to croak out. The tarp shifted again, slowly, painfully. The creature emerged. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, vaguely humanoid but covered in iridescent scales. Multiple limbs moved with unsettling fluidity, and the eyes, God, the eyes. A dozen or more blinking at me from what I assumed was its face. "Lost," it said, its voice stronger now. "Hurt, scared." I saw then what I'd missed before. One of its limbs was badly injured, leaking that strange fluid I'd followed. Despite its alien appearance, the pain and fear in its posture was all too familiar. In that moment, it didn't matter what it was or where it came from. It was a living being in pain, and it needed help. I took a step forward, then another. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and soothing. "I'm not going to hurt you. Can you tell me what happened?" The creature's many eyes blinked in rapid succession. "Attacked by one of yours. I was just trying to find my way home." The young woman in the alley flashed through my mind. Had she stumbled upon this being, attacked it out of fear, and in defending itself? I pushed the thoughts away. There would be time to unravel that mystery later. Right now, this creature needed help. "Okay," I said, crouching down to its level. "I'm going to try to help you, but we need to move fast. People are coming, people who might not understand." The creature nodded, a surprisingly human gesture. "Thank you," it rasped. As sirens began to wail in the distance, I helped the alien to its feet, all 6 of them. Together, we made our way towards the back of the warehouse, where I knew there was access to the old subway tunnels. I don't know what I was thinking. Harboring an alien fugitive wasn't exactly in my job description as a garbage man, but in that moment, looking into those strange eyes filled with gratitude and fear, I knew I was doing the right thing. As we disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, leaving behind the world of garbage routes and normal human concerns, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Just another day on the job, right? But deep down, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I had glimpsed something beyond my understanding, something that changed everything. And as we made our way deeper into the forgotten underbelly of the city, I realized that my real journey, our journey, was just beginning.